Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Set Lusting Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson. We are getting off the Bruce train, though I'm sure he will come up, as it often does. And we are rock and rolling all night and partying every day. Sorry, Martin, could not resist the pun.
Yeah. No worries. Yeah,
Yeah.
looking forward to this. I have a very strange relationship with Bruce Springsteen. I don't know what it is, but I it just feels like he's just always there in your life. I've got most of the albums, but I don't play them all that much. I absolutely respect the guy, but yeah, it's pretty weird. It's just something that's just there in the background all the time for you to eventually check out in a major way. He's one of these bands I call like a retirement band where
Ah,
yeah, where you feel like you could assimilate all of it at some point, maybe in a 2 week or 3 week period kind of thing. And there's a bunch of those that are lined up, and he's definitely one of
and
them.
the other he keeps releasing new material, right? Like
Yes.
he did two box sets this past year. Not only a Nebraska box set, but this Tracks 2, which was seven unreleased albums, which is
Mm,
crazy.
yeah. Yeah. Very cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and why don't you introduce yourself to my audience? Tell us a little about yourself.
My main thing is writing rock books, but I came up born in Trail, BC, or born in Castlegar, BC, raised in Trail, BC, just north of Spokane. Spokane is where we would go over the state line to buy all our records and stuff. Been a crazy music fan. Did a BA and MBA, worked a little for Xerox, and then we had a self-publishing, desktop publishing business, but got into this with an independent book in 93 and then got on with we started a heavy metal magazine here in Toronto, which ran from 94 to 2008. Quit the regular working man's world in the year 2000. So that's when I went full-time rock journalist. I've been doing a lot of interviews, reviews all along there, starting say in 94, and then was good for, I don't know, 4, 5, 6, 7 books a year, all leading up. So I've been full-time rock journalist, liner notes, Goldmine Magazine, Little Guitar World, our other magazine, little jobs all along the way, bios and stuff. But at this point, yeah, 26 years doing this full time and another six part time. And I'm at about 140 books now.
That is wild. So I always like to start at the beginning. So talk about growing up. Where did you grow up and what kind of music was your family listening to?
Yeah, the family, they weren't big music people. Dad listened to Russian music. I've got a Russian heritage. And I remember one of mom's artists was Melanie, who just died recently. But starting, I'm 62, going on 63 shortly. So I was born in 63. And so by 69, I was a rock fan. We hooked up with the Columbia Record Club, and I remember the very first things I got were Steppenwolf Gold, and there was Three Dog Night Live and some CCR. And then soon as I heard Heavy Sounds, and it was the heavy things in those that turned me on to Heavy Sounds, oddly enough. But soon as I heard Heavy Sounds, me and a few buddies around town were crazy music experts, probably starting at on our way at 10 or 11 years old. Got the first Kiss album as a new release and the first Rush as a new release, and already knew our Black Sabbath and BTO as a new release would be one of my earliest. But a lot of Nazareth, Blue Oyster Cult, Black Sabbath, all that. By 13, seeing my first major concert, which was Ted Nugent Rex and Bebop Deluxe in Spokane, and then was just a crazy music fan more than anything. Going through school, had a circus subscription. The new wave of British heavy metal came around, so there was even more metal at that point. Then off to university. So yeah, just as any hobby, be it trains or whatever, just music became a crazy hobby that I was into starting young.
The I love that, and it appears that you were always drawn to, as you talked about, the more heavy, strong rock of music versus singer-songwriters, pop, or as you talked about, Bruce, maybe even. Do, have you thought about why that spoke to you?
Yeah, there's a theory I have that I've talked about maybe on my podcast. I don't know if I've done a whole episode on this, but the idea of perfect music. And to me, things that could qualify as perfect music, it's a little bit the difference between realism and abstract art. Say the big famous New York artists that sell for tens and even hundreds of millions of dollars, right? Why is that stuff so revered versus pictures of cougars and wolves and mountains and things? And so to me, the perfect music part of it is more things like progressive rock. They're clearly trying to make perfect music. They're trying to be complicated and muso and record and say everything and make it 11 minutes long and all that. To me, pop by committee these days is a form of perfect music. And to me, heavy metal kind of fits that as well. It strikes me as a music that you listen to, anybody will listen to and go clearly, that's impressive, that's interesting. I always say don't barracuda me, which
Hmm.
is when people say, oh, that band's so heavy. Did you listen to that Dust album, that song Suicide? Man, that band was heavy. It's don't barracuda me, which means don't just tell me about the heaviest song they do. That's a little parallel to this idea of people finding hard music just impressive because Heart's most exciting and most beloved song is their one heavy metal song. People love when Mark Knopfler did that riff in Money for Nothing. That's their most famous song, yet it's the only song he turns on a distortion pedal for. So people love that. And I also talk about it as a kind of music that reminds me of a bunch of guys lifting the hood of a car, a hot car, and listening to the guy sitting in the driver's seat rev the engine. It's a machine. It's a perfect piece of engineering, and it is something that just sounds flashy and impressive. Everybody's working hard. The singer's pushing a lot of air. There's virtuoso guitar playing. It's fast. So I've that's the not so short answer. I just think it sounds like a music that on an objective level is impressive to people.
So, your latest book, you mentioned you have several coming out, but the latest and one we're going to talk about is Kiss 76, 12 months that defined the hottest band in the land. And that's going to be out February 24th, I believe, right?
Yep.
So, why Kiss?
So this is the second Kiss book I've done. This publisher, Quarto, has a lot of interesting concepts. I think I might even come up with one or two of them, but we do this album by album series. I did Kiss at 50. I'm pretty sure that was one of their concepts, and they've used it a lot of times, not just with me, but 50 career highlights. And we've done Bowie at 75, and I did that one. And Van Halen at 50. And they had the illustrated history concept. But this was my idea. They like the concepts, they like the fresh concepts. And it's odd, Jesse. It's like the first time I ever thought this idea of people are going to start writing books on bands of shorter, more tighter subjects was 10 or so years ago. I remember looking on the bookshelf and seeing a book on Led Zeppelin's 1975 tour. And I thought, well, that's interesting, right? So I don't know. I just came up with this idea. I wanted to do a love letter to the year 1976. And so this is a book that is that from a Kiss centric standpoint. So it just looks at, it's got 12 chapters, one for each month. And we just go through day by day what Kiss was doing all that year. This is their biggest year. In a funny way, they're touring Dress to Kill, Alive, Destroyer, and Rock and Roll Over, all in 1976. They put out two albums in 76, Destroyer in March, Rock and Roll Over in November. And in between, I think in July, they put out the originals. So that gave us something to talk about there, the first three albums. But my favorite part of it, and I'm gathering that this is what a lot of people like about it, is there is a whole section of two extra sections of what's going on in the rest of music news and what's going on in the rest of the world. Toys, TV, film, plane crashes, politics, all of that. And it's when I wrote it, when I saw the layout, there was a bit of back and forth because I was a little surprised by the layout, but I almost pictured those three components, the Kiss, the world events, and the music news, to be equals. But they've done it where it's all along the bottom, which works as well. So it's all there, nothing got cut, but it seems a little subservient to all the Kiss part. There's a lot of big Kiss pictures, and Kiss is a main thing. But when I wrote it, I really pictured it as all three of those components being equals in it. Like I say, it's just a love letter to this massive year in Kiss's history. And but I also wanted to make the point that a lot of other things were happening at the time, and subtly, maybe when you get to the end of it, with my hinting at this, is that there are a lot of more important things happening in 1976 than just Kiss.
Yeah. The so from my background, I graduated high school in 1977.
Okay.
So 76 was a pretty big year.
Yeah.
And a couple of my buddies were massive Kiss fans. And so therefore, peer pressure, I got in there. And if you heard rock and roll all night on the radio while you were getting ready to out, you're like, oh, it's going to be a good night. This is a good sign. And I had the I bought both new releases in 8 tracks because that
Right.
was what you bought. And so when I think of Kiss, I usually think of Destroyer because that was my gateway
Yeah.
8 track release. What about why was this year lightning in a bottle for these guys?
They almost went broke through those first three studio albums, and then Alive came out. And I remember we had a story where we put on a elementary school dance in my basement. I'll tell you the story quickly. It's pretty funny. So we used to go to the dump and look for stuff, right? Go to the town dump. And one day we went up the sandy road towards the dump. And before we even got there, there's this cardboard box sitting on the ground full of pristine 1974 April Wine tour posters. And it's the purple and black, really evil looking live shot that you get on that April Wine live cover and like a 3-4 inch stack of them. So we thought, oh, this would be perfect for our dance. So we went back to my parents' basement and we plastered them all around every single square inch of the wall, cutting out for the light receptacles and everything. And we put on this dance, and we were having this dance, and then one of our buddies showed up with Kiss Alive. And I remember all of us dogpiling him and ripping the cellophane off and putting it on and playing it. And then we looked up later and all the girls had left. The dance was over. This was the dance ending thing. So that was funny. So that kicks off. That was the excitement right at the end of 75 of this massive year that they were about to have. So Destroyer comes out. They're still touring Alive and doing well. They're touring the whole time too. In there is the Kiss Army stuff. I remember signing up for the Kiss Army. And yeah, they just keep touring. Originals comes out, which reminds you of the early albums, and that's got inserts in its gatefold. Kiss Alive, same thing, it gatefold inserts. And then Rock and Roll Over. So this is one of those rare occasions, but it happens a fair bit, but it's still rare that a band puts out two records in one year. It's neat that with this book also, it's very American looking with the flag in the 76 because this was also the bicentennial year. And so there are these iconic photo shoots, one being the bicentennial look with Peter with the marching drum and the flag. And there's also the on top of the Empire State Building shoot and the go to London shoot and the snow shoot for the winter and stuff. Just so they had a ton of iconic pictures that year, ton of iconic releases. And Alive had just come out right at the end of 75 to just kick it off. So yeah, it's their biggest year.
I got a rock and roll over fill in the numbers poster,
Oh,
and you
cool.
took with your markers and you colored
Yeah.
that. Yeah, I just those two 8 tracks were massive in our rotation as high school kids. And I had never seen them perform live till right after the pandemic, Martin. Came to Fort Worth, and it was I said that I was probably 63 at the time, and the 17-year-old me was just thrilled that I was
Yeah.
seeing Kiss perform, and they played all the songs I wanted to hear, right? I just if they could have just played songs from those two albums and done rock and roll all night, I been thrilled because
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
just I have that very niche following. This what doing the research and looking into the book, what did you discover that, what some interesting points maybe that surprised you as you started researching this?
Let's see. So I found it interesting that there were no singles released from Rock and Roll Over in 76. They all came in 77. That was cool. There was this whole promo album that I never owned and never even knew about, never even seen in a record store. That was neat. And the whole seeing how the career arc works where even as Destroyer is coming out, they're still touring Alive. And then the importance of the costume changeover and how that was haphazard. That was interesting as well. Um, Again, I wanted to make the point, but it was underscored for me how there were so many bands and albums that came out that were so much bigger than Kiss, and yet we all think Kiss was this big deal. But then I guess I learned by the end of it also that it's one thing for Fleetwood Mac to be putting out the first Fleetwood Mac black and white album, which is going to be huge, and Eagles Hotel California, which is going to be huge. And really the biggest artist of the year was Peter Frampton with Frampton Comes Alive. And but the Rolling Stones are important rolling through this time as well. But what I realized is that even though Kiss wasn't doing the raw numbers record sale wise as some of these other big institutions, they really sucked up a lot of oxygen in the room with getting as much press as all these other bands due to the visual more than anything. And just given that it was such an exciting point in their career arc at the same time, and they were out there just hammering it live and selling lots and lots of tickets, which probably even more so given they were really, I guess at the time, come to think of it, they were probably the gold standard of a live act if you go for gaudy things. They were definitely that. So I think that put them on par with all of these big bands, except for your bands that were playing actual stadiums, your Rolling Stones and your Led Zeppelins. But yeah, I just feel like there's a lot of learning that went on about, and like I said, I wanted to make the point that so here's how this point is so illustrated. I remember watching it like a 1 hour show on YouTube about the highlights of 1976 and went through all pop culture and everything. Kiss wasn't even mentioned once, right? In the
Yeah.
entire thing. So it's interesting to humble yourself and get to the end of it and realize, yeah, not everybody was thinking about Kiss in 1976.
But it why do you think they were touring so much, Martin? Was it just because that's what rock and roll, they in their mind, that's what a rock and roll band does? Is that they wanted that was how they were making a living and they just were pushing it as on the pushing the envelope as much as possible?
Yeah, an interesting question. The best rock and roll business model is a combination of strike while the iron is hot. If you are hot right now, get out there and make all the money you can because one day you won't be hot. So that's one thing. And also, it was, I guess in this case, I've never really thought about it this way, but I guess in this case, with this particular band and their product mix, live was where they were making their money because these records are struggling their way maybe fairly quickly to gold and still fairly quickly to platinum, but double platinum was few and far between for Kiss, and it took a while for a lot. So they weren't selling a lot of records. So this was where they were making their money as well. So it's a combination of that. I don't know if it's particularly, I've never really thought about how much these guys truly loved playing live. They've actually come to think of it, never really talked about that much. Or if they did, you maybe even don't even believe them. You just think they're being political about it, right? Oh my God, the fans are everything to us, kind of thing. But no, I think it's more so they had a good manager in Bill Aucoin. And I think the guys were also savvy businessmen enough to realize we actually are making money at this. And we did almost just a few months ago almost go broke, and our record label almost went under. We almost got kicked off the record label. Our manager has mortgaged his house we're running on credit cards. It's if this is working and we're making some money at this, we better keep doing it.
So one of the things that we did is anytime we got a cold and our voice was hoarse, we were like, oh, now I can sing like Peter, Chris, and Beth. And we would croak Beth. And it was interesting when I saw it live. Whoever was doing the cat part did
Eric
Beth.
Singer. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
It is any stories behind the recording of that and why they decided to do something a little softer.
Yeah, let me just say one thing quickly. One cool thing about Kiss that they don't get enough credit for is the fact that you had all four guys in the band sang, three of them sang well, four of them had interesting voices, And that's really cool. And they mixed it up and they had these guys do that. Ace was not the greatest singer, but he would give it the old college try and everybody loved him. But all three of the other guys, Peter was underutilized, but people loved his voice and he could hit the notes when he sang. Everybody sang. But I love the fact that all four of them had interesting voices. I often talk about, I don't know why I pick on Elton John for this all the time. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Elton, but I think Elton's a great singer and he's got a boring voice. I don't think he's got a great voice at all. So voice is just a God-given thing. It's nothing you should be ashamed of having or proud of, right? It's just there. And I think all four of these guys had interesting voices, which is pretty cool.
It is.
And Beth was this song. In fact, there's been some recent controversy about it, Gene, for some reason, putting Peter a little out of the story of it. But anyways, what happened was this is a song Peter had from his past band situations. Bob Ezrin loved the idea of this, and they moved it around and they changed it and they added orchestration and stuff. And it turned into this radically quiet ballad. They'd never even done even remotely anything remotely like this before. I come to think of it, I suppose across the first three albums, they had one ballad, Going Blind, and it was pretty heavy. So they came up with this song, and it was the B side of Detroit Rock City. I think that's right, Detroit Rock City. And so this went out as a single, and DJs were flipping it over and playing the B side, and it completely took off. And then they confusingly launched it again as the A side with the same B side, I believe. I think so, that's how that works. So right after that, it became the A side, and it became this big hit that saved the album. And it's I don't know, I've never really thought about this, but I don't know how many times previous this was really a formula in hard rock. I don't think it particularly was, but it became a formula with the infamous extreme more than words and all that kind of stuff later on, where you would have the ballad as a single off of a heavy album kind of thing. But yeah, this was an incredibly quiet single to be to have to someone like Kiss to be putting out.
I swear I don't remember if they were on Tom Snyder
Yeah,
or
they
Tomorrow or
were.
something where
Yeah,
they were they were playing that in the background as they came back. And I remember I in my memory, and of course that was many years ago, right? I remember my memory of Gene saying, I bet people don't know that's us. Most people would
interesting.
not know that. And
Yeah,
I was like, no, I think it's one of your West most well-known songs.
yeah.
Yeah.
People
So
are debating these days, Jesse. I saw somebody make a
yeah,
point about this, is that Kiss were absolutely pilloried for doing I Was Made for Loving You. And now apparently that's their most played song. And it's a disco song, right?
yeah,
And to the point where it was so much of a huge narrative that people call that their disco album. There's not really anything else like that on it. It's
yeah.
not a particularly heavy album, but it's not a particularly light album either. And it's definitely not a disco album, yet this disco song is weirdly their biggest song.
That is strange. I remember they did a tribute album and Garth Brooks did
Hard Luck Woman.
yeah, which
Yeah.
I thought he did a great version of. And they do seem have a diverse fan base from Tom Morello to Garth Brooks. And they, I know that they're everyone bitches about everyone going in the Hall of Fame. It just is.
Mhm.
But I thought that must have been a nice moment for them.
Yeah. Just to step back for a sec, that you bring up an interesting point about the variety of people who liked Kiss. And it's if you were of a certain age coming up in music at all, like you could not avoid Kiss and it was just super exciting to you, to the point where I've done 1,800 interviews with rock stars, right? And I swear to God, I totally believe this, that the second most influential band of all time in rock is Kiss. It's the Beatles and then it's Kiss. And I'm saying that from personal experience of having just being almost bored to hear that answer over and over and over again. How many people like Kiss was the band that turned them into wanting to be a rock star. So all of those heavy metal and hard rock, all the hair metal people, all the thrash people who are
Hmm.
exactly my age. So if you were a 22-year-old in 1982 coming up and being a metal star from 82 to 92, you grew up on Kiss, and Kiss literally was the band that turned you into wanting to do this. It's Kiss in 76 is pretty much the Ed Sullivan moment for massive amount of rock stars out there.
I love that story. Both Bruce and little Steven have talked about that, seeing Elvis and then seeing the Beatles on Ed Sullivan. But little Steven especially says, but seeing the Stones on, like, we couldn't be the Beatles. But when we
Mhm.
saw the Stones on Ed Sullivan, we go, oh, we could be.
Yeah.
So I wonder if there's a little bit of that, that growing up, that people go, oh, yeah, I can do what they do. Not that it's simple what they're doing, but yes, I can do that.
That's a great point. That's a great point. And it's probably what got me into drums. I became a drummer, and it's all those Halloween costumes that
Yeah.
all helped as well. The visual and the fire, and just how amazing the live show was. And then, yeah, they would go on and do these interviews. They would be on Midnight Special, and they had their own movie, and they were on Paul Lynn. So the Paul Lynn thing is in the 76 book because that came out that year. So there were iconic TV moments with Kiss as well that turned you into this. Yeah, I truly believe second most influential band of all time. And unlike the Beatles, the influence of Kiss, not a lot of bands ever sounded like Kiss because they were almost like a rudimentary, they were almost like what the Rolling Stones was to blues over time. Although that's putting down the Stones. I love the blues. I love the Stones. I hate the blues, but I love the Stones. And I guess what I mean, there's this thing about the Stones where, even 15, 20 albums in, they were still playing that little trapsy, we're this weird band that can't play and we're in a matchbox kind of thing, right?
Mm.
Kiss was always this rudimentary. You talk to Kiss fans, and it's a hard band to say anybody is like them. You come up with Slade, you come up with BTO, maybe Stars, which is mentioned in this book as well, because Stars was a part of that sort of camp. But yeah, you're right. The idea, so in a way, it's a little bit like punk rock in 77, 78. Kiss is like any guitarist can figure this out, any drummer can figure this out. It's all just it's chordal and not particularly riffy. Nothing's coming at you too fast. And yeah, in a way, it's like a deliberately, intentionally dumbed down version of heavy metal. Because at the same time, you're getting Rainbow, you're getting Judas Priest, you're even getting Aerosmith. Because even Aerosmith to us was like this vast improvement over the Rolling Stones. Here's our version of the Rolling Stones. Rocks is clearly better than anything the Stones ever did, kind of thing. But Kiss was in this. No, we're gonna go along and we're gonna be the dumbest throughout this whole thing. Blue Oyster Cult's up there. Ted Nugent's even a little up there. But Kiss is going to be, they're going to be the abstract art version, or the Wings. They're going to be what Wings is to pop, fairly spare. Kiss
Yeah.
is going to be that through the whole heavy metal movement.
Yeah. Was the comic book in 76 or was that 77?
I can't I don't believe any of that stuff happened in 76, if I remember correctly.
It
I think
doesn't
that's coming
feel
up a
like
little
it.
later. Yeah, let
Yeah.
me just look quick. Yeah, I don't think so. I think that's all coming up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Certainly got that one growing up as
Mhm.
loving comic books. And so to have that was just very cool.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Wow. D- What let's talk a little bit. If not only, I think they're known for their stage persona, all the makeup, a lot of controversy, Knights in Satan's service. I
Yeah.
I was growing up in a very small conservative town in Louisiana, and so that's the devil's music, Jesse. So, is that some of that covered in the book?
Let me think. I don't think a lot of that is in there because I don't feel I lived a lot of controversy about them. To me, I remember growing up thinking the most controversial thing about them is there are some truly scary pictures of Gene,
Mhm.
especially if he's spitting blood.
Yes.
So that's coming up. And when you mention controversy with Kiss, it almost feels that came up later when all the dirty laundry and the fighting and the drugs and the drink and oh my God, what do we do with Peter? What do we do with Ace? All of that stuff came up. And then Gene and the merchandising and all that kind of stuff. So I thinking back, it's an interesting question. I don't feel that it's funny coming up through the 70s. I always tell this story. In fact, I wrote an entire chapter on this in a Black Sabbath book of mine, but I've always been amazed that the front cover of Sabbath Bloody Sabbath ever got greenlit and never got censored in any way, shape, or form. And to me, that speaks to the fact that there was quite a bit of tolerance for this through that period. So I don't remember seeing much of that. And everybody could just make jokes about that Knights in Satan's service or whatever. But yeah, I don't know. It's because who else? Yeah, there wasn't much complaint about Kiss or anybody through there. I don't even feel there was much complaint about Black Sabbath through that period. I think
Yeah.
it seemed like people were media savvy enough to realize that this was a kind of a merchandising commercial
Yeah.
operation. Yeah.
This was a gimmick.
Yeah.
And I think that's often those outside the musical sphere may think they're just a gimmick band, but as you talked about, with the amount of people that have been influenced by them and helping them, they are much more than a gimmick band.
Yeah, and this gets to something I talked a little bit about realism and abstract, but I went on and did a show recently with some people and I think I've covered this in my podcast as well before, but this idea between dumb music and smart music, right? I think Kiss doesn't get enough credit for a Billy Joel, a Fleetwood Mac, an Eagles, a Bob Dylan to a certain extent, maybe even a Bruce Springsteen to a certain extent. Did I say Billy Joel, Tom Petty,
Yeah.
Fleetwood Mac? What they're all and Beatles, the hallowed Beatles, right? To a certain extent, what these people love as a challenge in life is to write the perfect pop song. And one of their definitions, and it's a brill building jingle approach as well, part of their challenge or their measure of success is how many people does this connect with. And to a large extent, a lot of these sorts of artists are lauded for that connection and the fact that their lyrics are universal, which is fine. They're not usually particularly deep. Let's leave Bruce Springsteen and Bob Dylan out of that. But what they're trying to do is write this perfect pop song, and all of their music does not deserve any extra credit over the music of Kiss for doing that. And then even what I just said about the lyrics, there's no reason the Eagles' lyrics should be lauded over the lyrics of Kiss. So the entire Eagles experience, I don't think it deserves any more of the critical acclaim than any aspect of Kiss. And it all goes back to the Beatles. Quite often the Beatles is just seems like seemingly a couple of tracks of guitar and a bass and drums and a vocal, and that's it. They're trying often to write just the perfect pop song. They're not trying to be incredibly ambitious about it. So I think it's not fair to put down a band like Kiss for what you hear on their records because Tom Petty ain't doing much more cerebral than what Kiss was doing.
Yeah. If I don't mind, let's talk a little bit about the podcast. Go ahead and tell my listeners the name of your podcast and give it an elevator pitch.
Yeah, I've got a podcast called History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff. It took me like 5 minutes to come up with that idea. And so far, it's lasted 345 episodes, never missed a week since I started here on Pantheon. And essentially, what I do is I come up with a theme. And because Christian tells us we're allowed right from day one, okay, you're allowed to play 30-second music clips or whatever, and that's it. And that won't get us into any controversy and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And we've had this debate over here. It's like, hey, guess what? We can play full songs. It comes up from time to time, and we all go, I don't know if I want to play full songs. What's the
Yeah,
point of that?
exactly.
So, anyways, so what I do is I just come up with a theme and have 5 examples that are the clear examples of this. I'll pick something concrete. Albums where the title track is the final track on the album. And
Right.
why are they doing it? And what kind of song is it? And what kind of tone does it cause? And all this kind of thing. But what I like to do is make sure I have 20 or 30 examples so I can babble for half an hour, which is what every episode's half an hour long, pretty much exactly. And so yeah, so the idea is to come up with a theme, but it's got to be supportable enough by 20 or 30 examples to give the history or whatever of what I'm doing. And just because of who I am and the kind of music I like, there's a lot of hard rock, heavy metal, prog, and punk
Yes.
and just classic rock in general. And
Yeah.
that's a large umbrella. The umbrella comes down super hard there because I know absolutely dick all about country or jazz or classical.
Yeah. Rick, what haven't you got to do on the podcast or writing that is still on your bucket list that you want to do? What's a scratch, an itch you haven't got to scratch?
On the podcast, nothing, because I literally go into every week with no ideas, and
Mm,
I like pray and thank God that I came up with one. And then yeah,
mm,
it gets me to the next 7 days. So it's not like there's a whole pile of, oh, I can't wait till I get to this for that. And books wise, I'm not working on anything right now, but I've got 9 books finished and in the pipeline. And I don't think I can really talk about any of those because
okay.
I generally have a rule that until the publisher announces a book,
Yeah.
they have their reasons to announce it whenever,
Yeah.
that I don't bring it up, kind of thing. But I do have 9 in the pipeline,
Very
and
nice.
but I'm not working on anything. And I don't know what I haven't done for books. I would say what I haven't done for books would be, there are certain bands I would love to write a book on that are some of my favorites, let's say The Jam or XTC or Kate Bush or Peter Gabriel or something like that. There are all these bands that are favorites of mine, but I don't really have any interviews that I've done with them. And furthermore, even if I did one of my non-interviewee type concepts, I don't have a publisher who wants to do it, or I personally don't think it will sell, kind of thing.
Okay.
There are definitely books I would love to do. I would love to do a Rolling Stones book. I've never interviewed anybody from the Stones. I don't know what kind of concept that could be. We do have a concept that might work, and it's one I've got a proposal on. But for some reason, I think about and listen to the Stones more than anybody at this point.
I
It's like that old joke they say about middle-aged white men, that eventually you become really interested in World War II. And maybe Rolling Stones is the World War II of the music business.
I love that. Martin, this was a blast. Thank you so much. I am so looking forward to the book. I think this will be great. I think it's going to remind me so much of my youth and bring back a lot of happy memories. I know that there was graduating in 77. We were the year after the big centennial, and
Yeah.
everything was about the centennial. And we were like, oh, okay. Yeah, I guess we're 77.
So what were your 5 favorite albums of 76 and 77?
Wow, man, that is a great question. Absolutely. I know Hotel California was a big
Right?
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, Frampton Comes Alive, Destroyer for sure. I would have to look to see the others, but those are three right offhand. And then I probably bought some Elton John and Barry Manilow because I was an AM kid. Did love Nazareth, Hair of the Dog. Don't know around that was around
Yeah.
there.
75. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't discover Bruce till everyone else in 80 with the river. Yeah. I was a big AM, just a radio kid.
Yeah.
And my first 8 track I ever bought was Elton John's Greatest Hits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You had a pretty
So,
open mind. We did not have an open mind. We were like, we literally measured everything almost mathematically, searching for heaviness.
yeah,
Literally. So until 78, 79, when I started drumming and getting into prog and punk and then
yeah.
post punk, it's like everything had to be heavy. And we had a
Hmm.
whole rating system. We'd call up a buddy. There's 10 tracks on here. It's a 3 out of 5.
Yeah.
There were so-sos, very goods, average. We had this whole rating system going, and it was all based on heaviness. So yeah, we're just angry young metalheads.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
I'm looking. I'm sure Chicago's Greatest Hits got some radio play.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know I wasn't. Yeah, I'll have to look. I'll have to think about that. That's a great question. All
Yeah.
right. Before I let you go, I end every podcast with the Mary question. It's the only mandatory Bruce Springsteen thing I do. Jay Armstrong was an honors English teacher in the Philadelphia area. He's now retired. But what he would do is he would give his students the lyrics to Thunder Road, and he would treat it as if it was a poem, and they would go over all the lyrics, and then he would ask his class at the end of the session, "Do you think Mary gets in the car?" So
Yeah.
Martin, that is your question. Does Mary get in the car at the end of Thunder Road?
I think so. I think the argument was just too great. It was such a romantic story. There's brilliant set of lyrics. I think she has no choice. And you could tell her mulling this over in her mind. And I don't think it took too much. I think she definitely does. Brilliant lyrics.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
really, it's funny. Bruce Springsteen is a little bit to me like Robin Trower, Voivod, in that every single time I play Bruce Springsteen, I go, why don't I listen to more Bruce Springsteen? And why am I not only listening to Bruce Springsteen? And it's like I have 15 bands that people see you play that game. If you could only listen to one band for the rest of your
Yeah,
life, what would it be? And
yeah,
Bruce would be on that list. It's
yeah,
like, I could just read his lyrics for the rest of my life.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
I've never really assimilated it all perfectly. And you know what? I think one of the problems is, Jesse, is I don't like his music very much. I don't
Mhm.
like that whole East Coast
Yeah,
Philadelphia soul schmaltzy
yeah,
pub
that,
pub rock, America's version of pub rock,
yes,
conservative, goofy sha-na-na,
yeah,
retro. So there's a bunch of reasons. There's a bunch of reasons when I play that old stuff and his up-tempo rock songs from the old days. But I loved all his quiet acoustic folk
yeah,
stuff and most of the ways he will put together even a loud rock song, pretty much starting in 1984.
yeah.
But before that, it's just something rubs me the wrong way about the type of music that was picked to
Mm.
back him up on those early albums.
If you ever decide to do a deep dive, you can come back and share that. So,
Yeah.
all right. Kiss 76, 12 months that define the hottest band in the land is available on February 24th, available wherever bookstores are available. If someone wants to reach you, what's the best way, Martin?
I part of my income, a good chunk of my income every year is being a mail order guy of my own books. So I have these and I've been signing and sending them out already. So that's all martinpopoff.com. I've got about 35 of my titles for sale there out of the 140. Ever since the tariff thing started, I went on a big panic binge down and I didn't restock a bunch of things that were old and not selling very many anyways. So that's why if you asked me this about 8 months ago, I would have had 100 of my 135 for sale. But, anyways, about 35 titles there. The big ones are the big, massive Deep Purple, the Iron Maiden, the Dio that recently came out, and redos of the Max Webster, Whitesnake, Merciful Fate, Accept. So, all that is martinpopoff.com, and there is the podcast, and we have a YouTube channel called The Contrarians as well.
Very nice. Thank you so much for joining me. This was a lot of fun. Listeners, go pre-order the book. Pre-orders matter a lot. And listen to the podcast. And everyone, stay safe, be kind, and we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye. And thank you for listening to this episode of Set Listing Bruce. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll check out other episodes of the podcast. Before we wrap up, I've got a few quick housekeeping notes on how you connect with me and follow my other projects. I'm still on Twitter, aka X, at Jesse Jackson DFW. The show is also there at Setlisting Bruce. We've got a Facebook page both for me and the podcast, so please stop by and give us a like. I'm part of a few other podcast adventures as well. On Perfectly Good Podcast, my co-host Sullivan and I are talking about every John Hyatt song in alphabetical order. Both Set Lustig Bruce and Perfectly Good Podcast are proud members of the Pantheon Podcast Network, home to hundreds of music folk shows. So explore, there's something there for every fan. My good friend Charles and I continue to do deep dives into all things Doctor Who on Next Stop Everywhere. And Lou, Karen, and I are chatting about pop culture and The Expanse on JKL Media. I'd love to hear from you. Email me at setlistingbruce@gmail.com. You can also leave a voicemail, 469-249-2442. If you've enjoyed any part of this podcast, please head over to iTunes and leave a rating or review. If you listen on Spotify, you can leave a comment after each episode. I will read them and share them on the show if you'll let me. They truly do help other people find us. Tell me what you like, tell me what you don't, suggest someone you think would be a great guest. Getting to talk to people about their experiences, whether it's music or other creative passions, is one of my greatest joys. I hope these conversations bring you a little joy, a little peace, and a whole lot of love. Keep hope alive.